Okay, now reading a single verse from the first chapter of Colossians, and that verse is 28. Paul is writing about preaching Christ. It is he whom we proclaim, warning everyone and teaching everyone in all wisdom, so that we may present everyone mature in Christ. There is a strong tradition that following Jesus' ascension into heaven, that the disciple John moved to the city of Ephesus in southwestern Turkey, where he played an important role in the church that was getting established there. Eventually, during a persecution of Christians, he was exiled to the island of Patmos, just off the coast, where it is said that he wrote the book of Revelation. In that book, John has a special message for each of the 7 major churches in southwestern Turkey. And they are Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Aren't you impressed? Back when I was in school, they said, no, the way to remember that is to think of ESP. You all know what ESP is. And then TSP, and then L. So there you've got it. From Ephesus all the way through to Laodicea. And they were all located in the same general area, and they all got a special message from the Lord. But conspicuous by its absence on this list is the church in the city of Colossae. City of Colossae was located in the same general area, just a few miles down the road. It was important enough to have received a letter from Paul. Of the 7 churches mentioned in Revelation, only the church in Ephesus had also received a letter from Paul. Colossae was the home of Philemon, who also received a letter from Paul, and 5 individuals who are spoken of by name in Paul's letters were also from the Colossae area. It was a large, important, celebrated city which held a vibrant Christian community. So what happened? What happened between the time Paul wrote his letter around the year 60 and when Revelation was written around the year 90? Well, around the year 61, the city was destroyed by a major earthquake, never fully recovered. Portions were rebuilt, but it was never the city it had once been. Several hundred years earlier, during the time of Alexander the Great, a large Jewish population, estimated at more than 10,000, had been deported from Babylon and resettled in this particular area. So there was a large population of Jews who had a strong tradition and very clear ideas as to what God had mandated regarding what they ate and what they should wear and how they should live and so on and so forth. But converts to Christianity left many of these ancient rules and traditions behind. They claimed to have been saved by God's grace, and they were set free from these human traditions and that tried to build up merit with God. Freedom is a wonderful word, but it also carries a lot of responsibilities. Today is June 19th, and about a year ago, President Biden signed a bill making Juneteenth a federal holiday. And of course, it commemorates when Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas in 1865 to take control of the state and by the authority of the 13th Amendment ensure that all enslaved people knew that they were now free. Now that sounds great, but if you had grown up a slave, how were you going to live? Where are you going to get your next meal? Where will you sleep tonight? Where will you get a job when all of these people are suddenly free and competing for the same jobs? Some of you may remember what it was like when the college semester ended for the summer. Man, for an entire semester, every day was consumed with reading textbooks and completing labs and writing papers and preparing for finals, till at last that wonderful moment arrived when it was all completed and you were set free for the summer, and suddenly you wonder, what am I going to do now? How do I find a job for just 8 weeks till the next semester begins? Boy, freedom, it sounds so good, but it carries its own set of problems and responsibilities. A friend of mine grew up in Philadelphia and joined the Army at the very end of World War II. He was sent to Italy as part of the Army of Occupation. Combat was over and done with, and there really was nothing left to do but celebrate, have a good time. Well, one day, an officer pulled him aside and had a talk with him, saying that he had seen hundreds of guys make the same mistake that my friend was making. Here they were, free from all the rules of home that they had grown up with. They were given their meals and clothes. They had a place to sleep and were paid on top of it all. This was an incredible, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but so many guys were just throwing it all away. They would go to town, they would party, they would get drunk. They were just wasting their time. And the officer said, why don't you invest this time by taking some courses and learning some skills so you can get a good job and make something of yourself when you get back home? Well, the message sunk in. He began to do just that. And eventually he did. He came home to be a Pico lineman and then a supervisor. And how often he used to talk of that time back in Italy when the officer set him on the right track. Sometimes we might think that freedom is simply being able to do whatever we want. And yes, there were those in the New Testament church who believed that they had been set free from all of the penalties of sin in order to indulge themselves. The old rules and burdensome commandments no longer applied to the believer. Let's live it up, let's party, let's do what we think will feel good. And these people claimed to be Christians, but often they were a real embarrassment to the church. Peter writes of them saying, "These people are nothing but brute beasts, born in the wild, predators on the prowl, in the very act of bringing down others with their ignorant blasphemies. They themselves will be brought down. In the end, they will be the losers. Their evil will boomerang on them. They are so despicable and addicted to pleasure that they indulge in wild parties, carousing in broad daylight. They're obsessed with adultery, compulsive in sin, seducing every vulnerable soul they come upon. Their specialty is greed. They are experts at it. They are dead souls." These were people of the church claiming to be Christians that Peter is speaking of. And then Paul wrote about this same sort of person, saying, They are self-absorbed, money-hungry, self-promoting, stuck-up, profane, contemptuous of parents, crude, coarse, dog-eat-dog, unbending, slanderers, impulsively wild, savage, cynical, treacherous, ruthless, bloated wingbags, savage, addicted to lust, and allergic to God. They'll make a show of religion, but behind the scenes they behave like animals. Stay clear of these people. Freedom is not about giving up discipline so we can do anything we want. Rather, it is embracing discipline in order to become the very best that we can be. Peter Gomes was for many years the chaplain of students at Harvard University, and he shared an event from early in his ministry there. Harvard, of course, is a very expensive school, and the administration understands the value, providing some special experiences that the students would not be likely to get at the lower-priced state schools. It gives the students something they can tell their parents about, and gives the parents, the check writers, something that they can brag about at the club or include in their Christmas letter. It keeps everyone happy. So on this particular Saturday morning, in support of a student he had befriended, he attended a special program where the 7 best undergraduate cellists would play a selection for the great Russian cellist Rostrovich, who was visiting the campus. The maestro listened attentively. He applauded politely after each selection, and through an interpreter was able to make a few encouraging comments, perhaps adding a little twist here or a little tweak there. Honestly, the maestro seemed a bit bored by the whole thing, but remained pleasant and engaged in the process. The second to the last was a young man whose parents had come from China and settled in New York. Gomes had never met him, but as soon as he began to play, it was apparent that there was something quite different about him. The maestro sat forward in his chair, and while others had played the cello, it was as if this boy had become the cello. A minute later, the maestro jumped up and was gesticulating wildly and talking far too fast for his translator to keep up. He made the young man stop. Oh, the audience was just shocked. I mean, it seemed so impolite. I mean, they didn't know if the maestro was upset or if he was angry or if he was pleased. And he went behind the student. He took his bow and, leaning over the boy's shoulder, played what was a slightly different interpretation of the same notes. The student repeated what he had been shown and continued, but a couple of measures later, the whole scene was repeated. It was obvious that this maestro was agitated. He was excited beyond words. I mean, his interaction with the student was agitated. It was intense. It was personal. Poor translator could hardly get a word in edgewise. And eventually, the student finished with a flourish, and the maestro flung his arms around the student's neck and showered him with kisses. We'd better check the student manual for this. This is all out of whack. And the audience clapped, but everyone was feeling uncomfortable and uncertain as to just what was going on. The translator pressed the student. What is your name? And the student replied, I am Ma. My name is Yo-Yo Ma. And the translator informed the audience that the maestro had never before heard such playing in all his life, and that he, the maestro, was in the presence of a genius. Well, Yo-Yo Ma was certainly born with enormous potential, but if that talent had never been developed and disciplined over the thousands of hours of practice, he never would have become the cellist that he is. And what could require more discipline than following a musical score? I mean, each note is determined, as is the timing and its place within the composition. And yet, with great practice and discipline, some musicians are not only able to master the piece, but they are able to move beyond it and are free to express their own interpretation and personality within those parameters. And so Paul wrote to the church in Colossae, encouraging them to move beyond needing to be warned or needing to be scolded, encouraging them to embrace the teaching of Christ and to grow in their spiritual maturity. Paul writes, "We are praying for you, that you may be filled with the knowledge of God's will, and that you be filled with spiritual wisdom and understanding, that you may lead lives that are worthy of the Lord, pleasing to God, bearing fruit in every good work. May you become strong and prepared to endure everything with patience, while joyfully giving thanks to God." You ever look back at your life and sometimes feel regrets? Regrets maybe for not having studied hard enough, or not having done more, or not taking something seriously. And sometimes you think of how those things that you didn't learn back then might have been such a blessing today. I remember in junior high, I guess it was, studying Spanish. I had no use for it. I mean, it seemed completely irrelevant. But of course now, as time goes on, more and more and more people are speaking Spanish. How I wish I had taken it seriously. How I wish I had memorized more poetry. I think as a boy, I think your mind is more flexible, more able to take things in and remember them. That now, when the older you get, the harder it is to break in and to seize ideas. How about you? Things you regretted, maybe not being disciplined enough back when the opportunity was there. Well, as long as we're alive, we still have those opportunities. We can choose to be disciplined. We can choose to learn new things. We can choose to honor God in all that we do.